What happens when the justice system turns its attention to those who can't speak, defend, or even understand the charges against them? In a world ruled by fear, faith, and power, some were dragged into court for crimes no one thought possible. What came next left entire villages speechless, and history changed in the most unexpected way. Picture this: knights, kings, magic, and monsters. Sounds like the stuff of legends, right? But beneath the surface of those familiar stories lies something way stranger. Have you ever wondered that in the Middle Ages, animals were actually put on trial? Yes, you heard me right. What if I told you that in the 14th century, pigs were dragged into court? No, this isn't some twisted fairy tale. It's real history that took place in a small village in northern France. And trust me, it will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the past. It all started with a tragic event in a humble village where a group of pigs broke free from their pen. But this wasn't just a simple escape. These pigs went wild. In their desperate search for food, they attacked children who never had a chance to flee. The horror was real, and when the news hit the village, it sent everyone into a panic. The locals rushed to tell the priest, and his first reaction? These pigs aren't just animals. They're possessed by evil forces. I know, it sounds insane. But in those times, such suspicions were enough to launch a full-blown trial. And within hours, a court was assembled. But here's the crazy part. These pigs weren't just being hauled into a barn somewhere. No, they were standing in front of judges, facing charges just like human criminals. Imagine this: pigs, wearing collars and sharp metal spikes on their tails, sitting in cages, their frightened eyes darting around as their every move was recorded. The whole thing seemed unreal, but the judges? They weren't laughing. In fact, they were deadly serious. "These pigs will answer for their crimes," declared Judge Jean Lambert, staring out at the crowd with a look that made it clear. He wasn't treating this like a joke. These pigs were on trial for murder. At first, it seemed like a bizarre overreaction, but then things took a darker turn. It wasn't just that the pigs had escaped. No, they were wild. They weren't just attacking for food. They were terrorizing the village, threatening anyone who came near. Some even claimed these pigs were possessed by demons, that their violent behavior wasn't just a random act, but something far more sinister. The accusations kept coming, and soon the church was involved, claiming these pigs were under the influence of dark spirits. Exorcisms were demanded, right there in the courtroom. Now, you might think this couldn't get any stranger, but it does. These pigs were sentenced to death. Yes, you read that right. Death. Not just a quick execution, but a public execution to show the villagers that no crime, no matter how monstrous, could go unpunished, even if the perpetrators were animals. But hold on. This story has one more shocking twist. The trial wasn't just about punishing the pigs. No, it got even weirder. The local townspeople, the families of the victims, were suing the pigs, demanding compensation for the loss of their children. Some claimed these pigs weren't merely out for food. They were on a mission to claim souls. They needed an exorcism too. It was a spectacle, one that could easily be the stuff of nightmares. And yet, this was reality. The trial of these pigs not only shook the local community to its core, but it also set a precedent that would shape the way animals were viewed in court for centuries to come. Could you imagine living in a world where animals, regardless of whether they understood their actions or not, could be held responsible for crimes? Well, in the Middle Ages, that was the norm. And just when you think it can't get any more bizarre, trust me, it does. We're just getting started with this story, and believe me, it's going to get even more intense. You won't guess what happens next. The Middle Ages are full of strange and shocking stories, but none might be quite as bizarre as the case of the cow that faced trial for ruining a farmer's crop. You might think, a cow in court? That's gotta be a mistake. But no, this is real. In 1474, in the Netherlands, a cow named Bella was actually brought to court, not for grazing on the wrong land, but for something far more serious. Imagine this, a once thriving wheat field, now destroyed. The golden crops, once full of promise, reduced to nothing. And at the center of it all, Bella, the cow, standing in the middle of the wreckage. The farmer, Jan de Bruyne, couldn't believe his eyes. He had worked for months to grow that crop, and now it was gone, trampled and devoured by his own cow. Sure, animals wander into fields, but this was different. Something about it didn't sit right. John, still in shock, filed a complaint, accusing Bella not just of eating the crops, but of intentionally destroying them. She didn't just eat it, she ruined everything, he declared. But what made the case even crazier was what came next. John wasn't just accusing Bella of being a hungry animal. He claimed she was under the influence of a demonic spirit. "There's no way a cow could act like that on its own," he said. "This is the work of dark forces." The local church wasted no time supporting this theory. Priests stepped in, declaring that Bella was not just an ordinary cow, but a vessel for the devil himself. People in the town, especially those close to John, started buying into the idea. They even called Bella a witch in cow's form. Her behavior was far too violent, far too strange for an animal. It was as if she had been possessed. Picture this, a small town, everyone gathered in the square, staring at Bella, tied to a post, ready to face her fate. The townspeople had come to the trial, curious to hear the strange charges. Judge Gerard Duran, with all the authority of the law, stood and asked a simple question. Who will take responsibility for this? And here's the twist. It wasn't just Bella on trial. Her owners were too. In the logic of the time, if your animal committed a crime, you, as the owner, were held accountable. So, what happened next? The judge sentenced Bella to death by hanging for her destructive actions. But here's where it gets even more outrageous. Her owners? They were fined. That's right. The cow was sentenced to death, and the humans involved were slapped with a fine. It was a bizarre punishment by today's standards, but in the Middle Ages, it was a completely normal legal practice. But that wasn't the end of it. The trial sparked fear across the village. People began to wonder, if a cow can be punished for destroying crops, what about other animals? What would happen to the dogs, the cats, the other livestock? The idea of punishing animals wasn't as crazy as it seemed. In fact, the case against Bella was the first step in creating legal precedents that held animals accountable for their actions. And the owners? They too would be responsible for their pets' crimes. This trial wasn't just a freak event. It was a turning point in medieval law. For the first time, animals weren't just victims or tools. They were criminals. And their owners could face severe consequences for their animals' actions. This case shook the foundations of legal systems everywhere, and the idea of holding animals accountable for their crimes would continue for centuries to come. But the story doesn't stop here. There's another tale waiting that will completely flip your idea of what justice looked like in the medieval world. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next. We've just scratched the surface of these twisted legal battles, and the next chapter is about to get even darker. Imagine living in a quiet little village in northern Italy. Everything seems peaceful, right? But not here. Something dark was stirring beneath the surface. It all started when a few villagers were found dead, with strange bite marks on their bodies. These weren't your usual dog bites. They were deep, precise, and brutal, like someone had carefully hunted their victims. At first, people thought it was just a freak accident. But as time passed, more and more bodies turned up, all with similar marks. And there was one thing all the victims had in common. They were connected to a wealthy merchant in the village. The connection seemed too odd to ignore. Was it a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? Whispers began to spread through the village like wildfire. People started to believe that the dogs from the merchant's farm weren't just ordinary dogs. Some said they were witches in disguise. Others claimed they were under the control of dark spirits, causing them to terrorize the entire village. And it wasn't just that. They were behaving as though they were taking orders, like instruments of evil itself. The fear quickly spiraled out of control. The villagers were no longer just terrified. They were desperate for answers. And so, the trial began. The accusations were enough to make your skin crawl. The dogs were blamed for murders committed under the influence of dark magic. The craziest part? It wasn't just the dogs on trial. Their owners were too. The wealthy merchant who owned the dogs was also accused of being complicit in these heinous acts. It felt like something out of a dark fantasy movie. Evidence was presented in court that these dogs didn't act on their own. They were following orders, demonic orders. The court, under the influence of the church and local authorities, decided that these animals had to be punished for their so-called crimes. But what happened next shocked even the most hardened townspeople. The dogs were sentenced to death. Yes, you read that right. Death. But the story didn't stop there. The merchant, too, faced severe punishment for allegedly leading the dogs into this madness. And if that wasn't enough, there was also an exorcism. The entire village was swept up in the hysteria, believing that these animals, and possibly their owners, were infected by demons. The ritual wasn't just some distant event. It was part of the desperate effort to cleanse the village of this curse. But did it work? Was the village truly rid of its evil spirits? The answers remained elusive, leaving people even more fearful. What happened next was even more chilling. The merchant, once a powerful figure, was ruined. His reputation, tainted forever, left him with nothing. His business crumbled, and those who once respected him turned their backs. People no longer walked the streets at night. The fear of encountering these cursed dogs, or worse, being marked by dark magic, was too much to bear. Even those dogs that survived the trial became objects of terror. What were once trusted companions were now feared and shunned. This trial, with its bizarre mix of superstition and law, left a permanent scar on the village and beyond. The ripple effect was felt throughout Italy, as people came to realize how easily fear and superstition could reshape reality. The idea that animals could be held accountable for such atrocities, and that whole communities could be punished for the sins of a few, became a frightening precedent for the future. So, what does this tell us about the Middle Ages? It wasn't all knights and fairy tales. It was a time when justice was as much about belief as it was about law. A time when magic, mystery, and fear ruled. And if you thought the story of the pigs and the cow was strange, trust me, this is only the beginning of the strange, twisted path we're about to walk down. You won't want to miss what comes next. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe. In the next episode, I'll dive even deeper into more shocking, bizarre stories that will completely change how you think about history. Stay tuned. You won't believe what's coming next.